If you're watching this on video, the lighting is pretty bad in here. I was just about, before the video started recording, I was just about to get up and go turn on a light, but that seems like a lot of work. So I'll just be quick and then get into the guest. First, today's presenting sponsor is always the same presenting sponsor, our friends, Il Taco Foods. Il Taco Foods has been feeding the hungry people of Chicago since 1927. Their most popular item, the Pizza Puff, became a Chicago staple almost as soon as it hit the very first hot dog stand in the city. For those that don't know, a Pizza Puff is premium mozzarella, crumbled Italian sausage, and a signature home-style sauce wrapped in a pillowy yet crispy crust. And that's just the original. I had an original Pizza Puff on last Friday evening. Had a few soda pops, a few tequilas, and then needed a snack around 1:30 in the morning. Had a bunch of Pizza Puffs in my freezer, still do. Pulled out the original. It was delicious. It satisfied my needs. But you can have it any time of the day, lunch, dinner, breakfast, whatever. They have 14 different flavors. Love the original, but they also have taco, gyro, Italian beef. They have so many. You can learn more about the flavors and where to buy them from their website, www.iltaco.com. Through 4 generations of hard work and a passion for good food, they're a family-run business now distributes Chicago's Pizza Puff in 38 states across the U.S. Check out the website to find out where you can get the good stuff. Again, that's www.iltaco.com. Now, today is Wednesday, October 28th. Next week, based off just what everyone's talking about, I've gathered that there is an election coming up. So most content that you're seeing everywhere is pretty much political. If you turn on the news, I mean, I live in Chicago and I still get political ads out the asshole. So I can't imagine what it's like in Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. That just must be awful to see ads for 2 guys running for president that there's a large portion of the country that's just kind of burnt out on both of them. So I sympathize with you. And now most of the content you're going to be getting in the next week from most outlets is going to be political. And because we do satire, a lot of it here is also going to be political, as it already has been, just because of what's going on in the world. But unlike when you open Uber app or Yelp app or whatever, I really don't care if you vote. This is the official position of the Velvet Hamster. Don't care if you vote, who you vote for, whatever. It's all fine. But given the current times, I thought it'd be appropriate to have a discussion on politics. But what I find more interesting, and I think a lot of people probably find more interesting than just talking about Trump or Biden or Trump or Clinton or Romney or Obama or, which asshole or douche you're going to vote into the White House, pick your poison kind of thing, is the political discourse going on and the cultural effects of that. And I think political discourse has been kind of tense. I think you'd all agree. So today I had on the host of a great podcast, a podcast called Just Listen to Yourself. She is Kira Davis. Kira Davis is also the editor-at-large at Red State, which, in case you didn't know, is a conservative outlet. But we don't spend time talking about conservative politics, Republican politics, anything partisan at all, or arguing about politics or policy or anything like that. Kira and I really talk about here political discourse, why it sucks, but also from Kira's perspective, and she kind of convinced me on this, why you shouldn't just abandon it with family and friends necessarily, even though it's way easier. I hate talking about politics. I like to abandon it with family and friends. But Kira makes a great argument about why you shouldn't do that and why we should learn to have conversations about people we disagree with. That's how we start off the conversation. A recent podcast episode of hers was focused on that, about having conversations about people you disagree with, how to have those conversations. And you get like a lot of think pieces from the Voxes and Salons and Slates and other bullshit publications about like 10 things you should talk about at Thanksgiving with your racist uncle. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about how to have substantive disagreements without getting into heated arguments and saying that so-and-so's a terrible person or whatever. Kira had some really great insight on that. And we talk about the changing media landscape, what some takeaways might be from this election, regardless of how it comes out. Not policy, not political stuff, but really the cultural stuff, the stuff about discourse. I think that's really the most interesting thing. That's the thing that I'm most interested in from this election. I don't really like whoever wins, whatever, it doesn't matter. Or maybe it will. But the outcome that I'm interested in is just how we treat each other. Can we treat each other better than we have been, and how we can have meaningful political conversations instead of, saying so and so is a terrible person because he disagrees with me on what the income tax rate should be, or this person's an awful person because they believe in free speech. Like, it just kind of got out of hand. So today's guest, Kira Davis, editor-in-large at Red State and host of Just Listen to Yourself podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts. But the first podcast you should listen to is this one with her right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Kaiser.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
I went out to eat for the sake of this next joke. Joke.
For the deviled cheese and sausage.
Joe Kaiser, ladies and gentlemen.
A question a lot of people would have is, how do you talk about politics or policy with people you disagree with? But also, should you? And you said something interesting, that you think you should still talk to your family about it, which I thought was an interesting angle, because I'm always like retreating, like I don't talk about literally anything else. Why do you think people should still talk to their family and friends about stuff like that?
Well, I think your family is your safest place to start, and it's your safest point of contact for politics, because for most families, I realize that some families are just irreparably broken. If you're going to break over politics, you're probably already a broken, you probably have already had some brokenness in your family already, and politics is just a symptom of that. But there are plenty of families out there who, you can, I just think that it's the best place to start, because you're safe with them. You're still family even when you disagree. It's why you should have these conversations with your kids around the dinner table, because it's the first place where your kids learn to disagree and still be accepted and still be loved. And it's the first place where a kid can learn to express their opinions, if you let them express their opinions, and not be rejected outright for them. And that's where they build up confidence. And it's the same way just with adults in your family. That's a safe place to discuss maybe controversial ideas or tense ideas about politics, but you leave knowing that you're still family, you still love each other, you're still there to support each other. So it's a good place to practice. Your family's a good place to practice talking politics. And then when you go out into the world, you won't necessarily have those same types of conversation with people that you don't know, with strangers that you can't trust, but you'll be more confident because you've already practiced at the dinner table, practiced with your crazy Uncle Al at Thanksgiving dinner or whatever. So I think family is a really, I get why people are saying no politics, no politics. And if you can't do it, then you can't do it. That's fine. But I do think that maybe we're doing ourselves a bit of a disservice by not bringing politics up at the family dinner tables anymore, because now we're raising a whole generation of people that don't know how to talk politics and how to disagree with somebody and still have a friendly relationship and still come away feeling good about that other person. People don't know how to do that anymore. Those are skills you learn at the dinner table, just like manners, just like saying grace, So I think family's your first point of contact for civil political discussion, or at least a civil ending.
That's a good point, because you wouldn't learn how to disagree with people, and especially it's a good place to practice with your family, because I think part of the problem with why disagreements turn into so and so's a terrible person, or that you question their motives and their morals when you disagree with somebody is because you don't know where they came from. But with your family, you kind of can see the logical conclusions that they made to get to where they believe stuff. I think the reason, if I had to guess, why people are so resistant, I'd include myself in this, about talking about politics, is it just seems, especially in the age of Trump, that it just comes up way more often. Like, we didn't used to talk about it every Thanksgiving or every Christmas. Um, why do you think that is? And I'm guessing part of it is the last presidential election, that it just comes up. It seems to come up more often now.
It, yeah, I mean, social media has made these conversations a little bit more difficult because social media is polarizing us all. And I'm not sure that politics does come up anymore at the dinner table now than it ever did. It's just that we know about it now. Everyone airs their family conversations. Everyone, sends a tweet out about, converting their dying father, and his vote on a deathbed. Or there's everything private is public now. But we used to have these conversations. It's not like politics was never a part of American conversation in the American family. But now we're just all hyper aware. And then the other part too is that all the celebrities that we love are into politics now. So culture is definitely meeting politics. Whereas my grandparents' age, entertainers were just entertainers, and their images were highly controlled. They didn't go out there and make political statements. They didn't have a Twitter feed to mouth off about whatever's happening in politics. You didn't have to know their every thought because you weren't supposed to. A great example of who I think is the last real movie star is Tom Cruise. I know he's a weirdo. I know he's into Scientology, and that's weird, but his image is tightly controlled. He doesn't talk politics. He doesn't talk about controversial
True.
stuff in the public. He's always, he's just always Mr. Friendly, glad handing, like he's a true movie star. He's a blank slate, really, in a lot of ways. But now our movie stars are so accessible that they've brought the culture into our homes in ways that maybe that hasn't happened before. They brought politics into our homes in ways that hasn't happened before. So if you're watching a TV show and you want to have a conversation with your mom about a TV show you're watching, politics are probably going to be involved with that. So that can get in the way, or that can get uncomfortable. But I on my podcast, one of the things I always say is know what your conversation is about. If the conversation is about Batwoman, and you want to see the new Batwoman, and you think that that's a really good storyline, and then that's what the conversation is about. Maybe you have to lead it back to that if someone wants to make it political. Well, the new Batwoman is black. I don't think that that's right. Taking a white character and making her black. Maybe you pivot that. You say, well, maybe, but what I love about the show is that it's about a strong woman, or that the costuming is really great, or whatever. The editing is fantastic. Know what you're going into your conversations for, and stay on target. That's a big help.
Right. No, that's a great point, because sometimes I wonder if, the access to information we have now with social media is great for a lot of reasons, but sometimes I wonder if we're still learning what to do with having so much information thrown at us all the time, and having, like, your brain is almost taking in too much stuff, and a lot of it has to do with politics. There's politics and everything now, and it's just coming at us all the time. And I think we're still learning how to digest that, and then how to have conversations about it. Like, and maybe that'll lead to more people kind of getting burnt out about politics being with every celebrity or in sports or whatever. I think you're kind of seeing that with sports, especially right now. A lot of people are getting a little tired of politics being involved in sports. And then maybe that'll shift. Like, maybe you'll see less politics and stuff over time just because people get tired of it. I don't know. That's kind of the assumption that I've made, is we're always still kind of learning how to deal with that.
Yeah, I think social media is going to be interesting. I'm not sure. I couldn't have predicted the evolution of social media up to this point, so I wouldn't dare predict it from here on out. But you may be right. I think because it was okay to politicize everything, I suppose, when these are the only options people have. But now with the internet and social media and things like what we're doing today on Zoom, people have the ability to put out their own products and find their own audiences. They don't need the networks. They don't need the movie studios, especially now in the days of COVID when those big behemoth organizations are actually shut down. They couldn't be flexible enough to shift with the times. And so this is a great opportunity for independent creators to have their work seen. So now what I'm seeing is people going and finding the content that they want. They don't have to be satisfied with what they turn on ABC or NBC anymore. If
Yeah.
that doesn't suit their needs or if it feels offensive to them, they can go find content that entertains them and doesn't insult them. And so I think that may change the entertainment landscape and the political discussions within as well.
It is really hard. We couldn't have predicted anything this year and how that moved people to Zoom for meetings and creating their own content. But I do think it definitely, anyone that wanted a creative outlet or was looking for new ways to break through with content they were creating, it definitely pushed them there. And 20 years ago, you had to get the permission of a network or a publisher or radio station, whatever your outlet
Right.
is, to create something. And now, and that's why it's so hard to predict the future of social media. Now you're seeing more people realize, oh, this is attainable. I can create content. So it's almost impossible to predict how is that going to influence our conversations. Like, how is that going to influence our political discourse when everybody can be a publisher of their own content?
Yeah, and I think positively because then you don't have the gatekeepers anymore. The gatekeepers are probably a big part of the problem in why we can't have or why it's so hard to have meaningful and polite political discussions. You've got a media that is really set up as, look, here's the top tier, we'll tell you what the news is, and then we'll also tell you how to think about the news. For instance, a couple months ago, the New York Times had came out and said, "Look, we think everything that Donald Trump says is a lie, and so we're not going to directly quote him anymore. We will only add, we will only tell you what he said and add our own context." Now, if you don't like Donald Trump, that sounds like a great idea. You think he's a liar, and so why would they print everything he says? But the problem with that is that they are the media. They are the news
Right.
reporters. And so that instead of being a reporter, they're acting as a gatekeeper. And they're also telling their audience that their audience isn't intelligent enough to discern between lies and the truth. And that is not their job to discern those things. It's their job to report on how those things are shaping up in politics and culture. And then it's our job as the reader to discern whether or not we believe that, whether or not we think that what Donald Trump said was a lie, or whether we believe it's the truth. That is a huge media outlet that is a gatekeeper for a lot of the industry, telling us, the reader, and us, the content producers as well, that um, that there's only a certain way to do this, and it's our way or the highway. And that becomes a problem because then you're not giving your audience the credit for being intelligent enough. It's insulting. It's insulting. And so when we open up avenues like this, we don't just give people more outlets and give people more options. We also remove some of the influence from the gatekeepers. And not to say that those people at the New York Times are bad, and I think that they thought what they were doing was right,
Mhm.
but it's not right. It's actually wrong. It's actually wrong in the news industry. And I don't think it's safe to depend on people who think that way as the gatekeepers of the media. And that's why it is going to be really important for people like you to have stuff like this going on, have conversations like this going on, making your own content, people going and finding who they like, and then you can make the decision as to what suits your needs politically. And I don't know, will that make our political discourse worse or better? I think it'll make it more informed, to be honest, and that can never be a bad thing.
I think so. Yeah, I think it might be some trial and error in there, and people trying to figure out what they want. But I agree with you. I think it is a positive. In the case of a company like the New York Times, I don't think they're bad either. And I think what a company like that tries to do is make what they think is a good business decision. And if they think their audience wants that, craves those kinds of decisions, they might go for it. But in reality, because it is insulting, I mean, we all grew up thinking that the news reported the facts, then we decide. I mean, it was the moniker, I don't know if it still is, a Fox News for a while, is we
Mhm.
report, you decide.
Mhm.
Um, and it's insulting when they're not going to do that. And I think it does turn a lot of people off. I mean, the New York Times is still huge, but for example, I don't know anyone personally that watches Chris Cuomo or Don Lemon every night. Like, I don't even know. I know there are millions of people that watch CNN every night, but I don't know who these people are, because more and more people are turning to podcasts or turning to just getting snippets of those shows on YouTube, or just getting their news from Twitter every day. So like that's a small shift that we're seeing right now, but there might be more. If the New York Times makes decisions that insult their readers or prospective readers, then they might shift to a blogger. But readers might shift to a blogger.
Yeah, and I think 2016 threw us for a little bit of a loop, and 2020 may do the same, because what 2016 did was it revealed that there were a whole bunch of people who were outside the status quo, who just weren't making their feelings heard. They just made their feelings heard at the ballot box. We didn't think they existed. We thought they had gone away. Whatever. And that might be the mistake that the current iteration of political media is making as well. They're not giving enough credit to the hidden viewer out there, the people who really don't want to make a lot of noise, just want to turn on the news and see the news, and decide for themselves what the news is saying. And they don't they don't want to be on Twitter. They're farmers, they're factory workers, they're dentists, are just people serving their communities every day, and they go home and they pay their bills and they love their kids, and get up and do it all again. Like, not everybody in America, in fact, most people are not raging political monsters. And
No.
we seem to be at the mercy of a media that wants us to be that way. And even, I mean, I'm part of the media, and I know how we craft headlines. We craft the headlines so you'll click on them. You're not going to click on a headline that says, Kira Davis drinks water from a green bottle on this podcast, but the headline you might click on was, what on earth is this Black woman drinking? Like, that might be the the headline you click on.
Sure.
We get paid from clicks these days. That changes the nature of the whole situation as well. So I'm very aware of how we try to manipulate the audience to click on our stories, to show our stories. And I agree that that's been a problem, and it's becoming a huge problem. When I work for a blog, so that's the game. It's not a secret. You know it when you visit us. Our politics are in our name at my particular blog, and we don't pretend to be biased. But it does become a problem when you have outlets like CNN or a reputable paper like the New York Times saying, this is just we're representing the way all of America thinks. This is just par for the course, what the way we think is normal. But presenting it salaciously, it it creates division, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right.
I think what creates division, and I think the basis of this whole discussion we're having right now about how hard it is to talk politics with people, I think the base of this whole problem is that we've been set up to believe that there's just two sides to this whole thing, and then you have to decide which side is good and which side is bad. And if you're on the good side, then the other side is not just bad, they're evil, and they need to be eradicated. That is a function of our media, and that's a function of our social media. And it's why I always tell people, this is not how Americans live their lives every day. You're not living your life every day like this, are you? When you see your neighbors, you're not at each other's throats. You're not scratching each other's eyes out. You're not calling each other Hitler or Nazi. You're saying hello. You're living quite peacefully next to each other. I think if you want to feel better about having political conversations and having them in a productive manner, get off social media and go talk to somebody face to face. The conversation is typically way different.
I tell people that all the time, because even people who are relatively apolitical or just not partisan, if they spend too much time online, they end up thinking that Twitter is real life.
Yes.
But go to a grocery store, you're passing by people of all kinds of different views every day, and you're not going to get in any fights with them. If you just interacted with somebody you didn't know, a stranger, kindly, you wouldn't even think, oh, what is this person? How did they vote in 2016? That's not how
Yeah.
people interact. They don't interact like they do on Twitter, but it's so easy if you spend your time, especially if you're getting your news from Twitter, which I'm guilty of a lot, just following hashtags, searching for what, even beyond politics, sports, whatever, getting your news from there, and you're on there all the time, and you see the fights, you see the people jumping in replies, trying to cancel each other. You end up forgetting that that's not real life. And it's hard to tell people just don't go online, because you can get a lot of benefits from news in real
Right.
time too. But I think it speaks to like 30% of the voting age population, I think, in 2016 just didn't vote. And people want to fault them and say, why didn't you go out and vote? Why didn't you, like, you could have been the difference in the election? Well, there's a reason that a significant number of the voting age population chooses not to vote. It's because they find this whole thing toxic. And I think instead of trying to bring them in and trying to turn them into partisans and teach them that Twitter is real life and this is how it is, and there's divisions, there's two sides, you got to be on one of the two sides. If you don't vote for Trump, or if you don't vote at all, you have to vote for Trump, kind of thing. We should just make the culture less toxic and show people that this isn't how we actually act.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And also, I've never been a big fan of shaming people for not voting. I
Same.
mean, by the way, if you don't know what the issues are and you don't understand what you're voting for, don't vote then. Don't vote. Do us all
Yeah.
a favor and don't vote. That's fine. You are not compelled to vote in this country. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason why we have get out the vote campaigns, and we educate each other. We do our part to make sure people get out and participate in the process. But the idea that you're some kind of murderer if you don't cast a vote in every presidential election, that's silly, and it's not even an intelligent idea. Maybe you don't want some of these people voting. If
No.
you're mad that 30% of the people didn't vote, how do you know they were going to vote for your person?
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
if they came out, maybe you don't want them voting. So we need to stop. I really hate, one of the things I hate the most about election season is get out the vote ads.
Me too.
Like celebrities telling me to vote. And now every time you open social media, like there's a message, a huge alert message, go register to vote. Vote. Like, it's so annoying. Been registered to vote since I could vote. A lot of people have already voted. It's just so annoying. But to me, it smacks of desperation too. And it also smacks of a little bit, I think one of our other issues here is that we've given up civics education. So it smacks of ignorance to me. Like, you gotta vote like your life depends on it, because it does. My daughter and I were on a road trip recently. She's 13. We went to Texas and we drove under this underpass, and someone had graffitied under the underpass, vote or die. And my daughter was like, oh my gosh, that's really serious. She's like, what if you can't vote? And I'm like, well, I guess you'll die. But it smacks of desperation. And we just went through another messy Supreme Court nomination as well, and people were very upset. But to me, when people get so upset and so emotionally invested, it's because they don't understand the civics of American politics, how it works. The president is not supposed to be the most powerful person in your life. You should actually not be so invested in this person that if the wrong person wins, you're sitting in a bathtub for 6 months weeping and in the fetal position.
It's sad.
That's not how our government is set up. That's not how it works. We should be interested in who sits on the Supreme Court, but the judicial branch is meant to be the weakest branch. And so maybe instead of whining about who gets on there, maybe we ask ourselves, why has it become so important in our lives? How do we get back to reducing the power the Supreme Court has over the legislative process? That's not their job. They're not supposed to make law. They're only supposed to rule on laws that come to them. And so we don't teach civics enough to make people feel comfortable. So everybody feels panicked every election cycle because they don't understand how American government works, and that it's actually, as crazy as it seems, as crazy as Congress looks, it's actually working just fine. Congress is actually supposed to be gridlocked, y'all. A lot of people don't know that. It's designed to be gridlocked. Do you want these people to get everything done that easily?
Right.
They shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that easy to make new law in a country like the United States. Our government's actually working just fine.
Yeah,
I know it's not the popular thing to say, but it actually is.
people always complain they're not getting anything done. It's like, what do you want them to get done? You want them to pass
No,
more laws?
you'll get California, because
Right.
California has a super majority, right? And everything gets done like that, like blink of an eye. Whenever I see a report of a new bill coming to the assembly, I don't even have to check up on it in the legislative process. I know it's going to pass. There's
Yeah.
no opposition party in California. Democrats have a super majority, and so every idea gets passed, every single idea, and we are talking hundreds of laws a year. I think Governor Newsom last year signed 400 new laws as governor. I mean, no, we don't want these people
It's crazy.
to get things done so easily. Trust me, gridlock is what it's meant to be.
Especially if also at the same time people also have the opinion of, I don't trust anyone in Congress. I don't trust, they're all in it for themselves, which is probably true. But then you also are complaining that they're not getting anything done. It's like, if you don't trust these people and you think they're self-interested, why do you want them to be doing all this kind of stuff? Gridlock is good to
Right.
keep these people in check. The
Yeah.
relationship that I would want to have with the president especially, but then with senators and Congress people too, is I don't want to have to think about them. I don't want to have to think about what the president
Right.
does. I want it to be a transactional kind of relationship. And you would think, especially after COVID, people would be more interested in who their mayor is, who their governor is, who their city council person is. I mean, sitting here in Chicago, I think more people are now aware of like who our mayor is and why that matters and what their mayor is going to do in crisis situation, and think more locally about how things affect them, and try to have a more distant relationship with the president. It doesn't help that cable news exists, that Twitter exists, that the current president is a former game show host. None of that helps,
Hmm.
because there is kind of this entertainment feel to it. If you see the ads for the presidential debates the past few weeks, it sounds
Yeah.
like it's like the Super Bowl or something. Like the stakes are so high. None of that helps. But I don't know. Do you see any way that people snap back and start to have that kind of relationship with Washington?
I think we're going to see some interesting changes this election cycle, actually down ballot. I keep telling people your down ballot votes are going to be where the real fireworks are going to happen this election cycle, because you're absolutely right. COVID's come along and it's brought a new unfortunate appreciation for what your local politicians are doing to you and for you. And a lot of people are not happy one way or the other how their politicians are dealing with COVID, with lockdowns. By the way, as you and I sit here talking, my son is in the other room attending DePaul University in Chicago. DePaul, which we're paying a fortune for and has no plans to open up as far as I can see at any point. So that's a case of a local politician having a huge effect on my life. This is my son's freshman year in college, and he can't go to college. And he lost his senior year to COVID as well. And so that's an example of my life being affected by a local politician who is far away. Not Donald Trump,
Yeah.
not my senator, but a local politician who has her own ideas and agenda and loyalties and all of that that might not have anything to do with mine, but it still affects me. And I see it around here, California. California is in for a shakeup, I think, on in some local races, because people are starting to realize, like, when COVID hit, sure, there's some stuff the president can do. Like, he can recommend we all wear masks. He can recommend we all have a stay-at-home order, but we're a republic. He can't order any of this. I think people started to see, like, oh, he really just can't walk into your state and tell you what to do. That is your governor's job. We have to look to our governor now. Well, some of these governors aren't making decisions that are very popular with their constituents. And it doesn't have anything to do with Donald Trump. It doesn't have anything to do with how crazy he tweets. what kind of weird thing he said about yesterday, or doesn't have anything to do with that. It has everything to do with your local politicians.
And that's, I think, doubly obvious because a lot of what people talk about, at least casual voters, with Donald Trump is more of a rhetorical thing and a character thing. And I think it's all valid. I think there's a legitimate argument, legitimate criticisms to be made about his character and about his rhetoric. And I mean, I'm libertarian. I have opinions on policy, but I don't care for his character. I don't care for who he is as a person. And I think that if that's how you're voting on president, those are legitimate things to think and have values about that. But also, you should think if those are the things that are bothering you most, then it kind of shows how separated the president is in terms of policy, in terms of actual decisions that are impacting your life. Because the thing you're caring about most when you're voting is all character. And a character counts,
Yeah.
it matters, but it's not the same as policy decisions.
And what do you do if nobody has good character in
Sure.
in that election cycle? I mean, we keep having this conversation as if one side has character and one doesn't, and I don't necessarily think that's true. I think in 2016, I really shifted a lot in how I think about that issue of presidential character, because I was not pleased with either candidate, and neither candidate was somebody I would want to leave my kids with, you know? Um, but I guess I realized, and some people don't make that decision. Some people just peace out, and that's,
Mm-hmm.
as I said before, I think that's fine too. I think that's perfectly legitimate. I'm not going to force you to vote. That's your vote. And you get to not vote if that's what you want to do. For me, I feel strongly about voting. I always have. It's a big deal in my family. I'll always make a choice. And I just realized, but there's no person of moral upright character in this election. There isn't one. I might turn on Chris Cuomo and he might be telling me there is one, but that's just his opinion. There isn't one. So what do I do? Yeah, what then do? I either just don't vote, I remove myself from the process, wash my hands of it, or I base my vote on something else. Does this person's self-interest line up with my self-interest? Does this person have an agenda that would serve me and my family in the way I want to be served? You start looking at it in different ways. I know here in California, we're really at a precipice. We're really standing on a precipice here because there's a lot of laws that have been passed in the last 10 years or so that are just now starting to affect people's safety and their jobs. And California is a true blue state. But there are a lot of people who are looking at their down ballot races. This isn't even about presidential politics right now. They're looking at their down ballot races and they're saying, I've been voting for the same people for 20 years, 15 years, and things are worse today than they've ever been. And these people don't seem to be listening to us. They just take our vote for granted because we're too blue. I'm seeing a lot of people decide to switch their vote, not because they want to be Republicans, but because they just want to make a statement. Hey, we're here.
Mm-hmm.
We're your faithful, and you're not even listening to us. So if you don't appreciate us, we just want to remind you, that our vote can go somewhere else. California is going to be an interesting experiment in the next couple of weeks. I'm excited to see how it turns out here. Could be same old, but I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to see what people do when they're that frustrated. I think oftentimes they just check out of the process, like we said, especially when it's painted as it's one side or the other. And if you're left with, just using the last two presidential elections as an example, two people with questionable character, people talk about now like mental capacity to be president, and you're told that you have to pick one or the other, you're going to have people saying, well, I just don't want to be involved in this question and this debate. And I don't know the down ballot, besides what you just told me, what's going on in California down ballot, but if people actually do have an alternative to air their frustrations, that's interesting. And it's not, when it's more local, it's not painted as one or the other. There's not that entertainment factor to the race of this is, the stakes are so high. You talk about it on CNN all the time. When it's more local, there's not that fanfare to it. And I think that's a more likely place where frustrations can be aired out constructively. Whereas for president, it's much harder because it is this entertainment, this big spectacle that we're all talking about. And there's this, it's on social media. And sometimes I think people vote because of the participatory aspect of it, of needing to feel like they're part of something when they're voting for president. But if you're voting down ballot, you're voting in local races, it's probably because you actually do care about it.
Yeah, listen, I'm 46 years old, and I have never, not once, lived through an election that wasn't the most important
Yeah,
election
right.
of our lifetime. And America was going to end in 2008. That's what I heard also. I can remember my parents telling me that Ronald Reagan was going to destroy the world and that Ronald Reagan was going to be the end of America. I mean, it's just George Bush, 41 and 43. Like, I have never lived, and I mean this sincerely, I have never lived through a political cycle that wasn't the most important political cycle of our lives. So whatever happens next week for us, well, there's another election in 4 years.
Yeah.
There's going to be another election in 4
In
years.
2 years.
And and I don't want to belittle your concerns. Like, if you have concerns about the president, whoever that may be, coming up, and you're really scared, I don't want to belittle that. Like, I don't want to belittle what people are feeling. I get that. But I said this on the day after in 2016, like, when a lot of my friends were just desperately upset and scared and like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to my kids? And I'm like, what's going to happen is y'all are going to get up and start your car and go to work like you did yesterday. And in 4 years, we're going to be right back here. We're going to have another election. And I was right. Here we are. It's 4 years later, another election. Oh, and by the way, this one happens to be the most important election of our lifetime. 2016 was, I guess we blew that one, so it didn't count. So it'll be this one. But I always encourage people, like, we have to keep things in perspective. I get that the president is important, but our system is actually a genius system, and it's set up so he actually isn't all that important. He's important actually to the world. He's actually more important to the rest of the world than he is to us. Our president can be anybody. Our president can be anybody from any party, and our lives go on pretty much unchanged based on how we vote at the local level. For the rest of the world, yeah, that president does look a little more important. That's kind of the genius of the way the system is set up. He is more important to the people out there who have no say in who the president is than he is to us, and that's how it should be. And there used to be a time when you didn't even know your congressman's name, your senator's name, not because you were ignorant, because that person didn't have much influence over your day-to-day politics. This was a dog catcher, the school board. Those were the important people. And I'll tell you this before I let go of this point. I have been in city council meetings where the council has taken a terrible vote, like a vote for a raise, an undeserved raise, off the agenda because there's one person sitting in the audience. Your city council, yes, your city council gets away with all kinds of crazy stuff because they know you don't care. They know you're worrying about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, and you're not worrying about all of the ways they're skimming off the top of your local tax dollars. Show up at your city council meetings. Show up at the school board. You don't have to go every time. Pick one a year to go to. I get that everyone's busy, but they depend on your ignorance. And I've seen bad laws be done away with just because there was one set of eyes on it.
Yeah, as in a previous life reporting on an issue, working as a reporter, I went to a city council meeting somewhere in the Chicago suburbs, and they were voting on a budget, and there's like 5 citizens in the audience and then me, and I stood out. They knew I wasn't. I didn't usually show up to these things, and I had a notepad and a tape recorder, and they didn't do anything at the meeting. And I was talking to somebody I knew there after, and she said, yeah, they didn't vote on it because you were there, and it freaked them out. And they didn't know who I was, but they knew I was somebody with a notepad, and it freaked them out. So yeah, that stuff's critically important. On the I just wanted to close the loop on the most important election of your lifetime thing.
Yes.
I've heard this since I became really politically involved or aware around 2008. It comes up, and I fell for it in 2008 for sure. I was young and new to politics, and I thought this was the biggest deal ever. But then I think another problem with saying that every election is the most important election of your lifetime is, while it might intensify some people. At the same time, when you hear something over and over again, but then your life continues as is, those words can also lose meaning. So for the disenfranchised voter who is looking for a reason to vote maybe, but doesn't feel engaged, and they're told 2012, 2014, 2016,
Hmm.
2018, these are all the most important of your election of your lifetime. Those are just empty words. It's like the same thing of when when the left called John McCain and Mitt Romney racist. All of a sudden, when you do it to Donald Trump, who there's more of an argument to be had there based on certain things, it's the boy who cried wolf. Like, we heard this before. Like, we're not falling for it. And I think that's another problem with it is it further disenfranchises people that don't feel engaged because they've been told this over and over again. And guess what? Their life just went on as is.
Yeah, yeah, it does. We call that, there's a term for that. It's called semantic satiation. And it's a psychological term actually, and it's when you repeat a word. Maybe sometimes you've noticed this in your own life. If you're reading something and you read like a very regular word, like the word window, but sometimes you stop and focus on it for a second, you're like, well, I never thought about how weird that word sounds. Window, window, window. When you say it over and over again, it begins to lose its meaning. And then also the sound of it changes in your brain. So then it becomes completely meaningless. That's called semantic satiation. That's what we're experiencing right now in politics. And I think I think social media is a big experiment in semantic satiation, using the same terms over and over and over again. They're becoming meaningless, and people are tuning out. And you're exactly right with that whole, this is the most important election. I know for people like me, I've now tuned that out. I, like you, there was a time when I thought, yeah, oh yeah, this is it, this is the one. And yeah, some policies were passed that I didn't like, and some were passed that I did like, and yeah, some had an effect on my life, that I didn't appreciate. But then what I did was I went in the midterms and I voted for the senator and the rep that I thought was going to voice my opinion in Congress on those policies and help change those policies. So I was still involved in the process. Anyways, all this to say, the world hasn't ended yet. I don't know. It may end on November 4th or November 10th, whenever the hell it is we get these results in. But my money's on no. Everything's going to go on, and y'all will just live your lives just fine until the next election.
I don't think it will either. And I'm not going to ask you to make any predictions, especially this close to an election. But we were talking earlier about
Trump in a landslide.
is that
There you
actually
go.
going to be your prediction?
That's my prediction.
It is for real?
Yeah.
Okay. I will find out really quickly if you're right or not. Nothing would shock me. I mean, the world ending would shock
I
me,
know.
but like nothing
That's why I feel
electorally.
like so bold about that. I feel like I can be bold about it. I'm actually
Sure.
not really that smart. I don't have that much more knowledge than anybody else, but I just feel like, oh, what the hell? 2016 was the toss up. I can say whatever I want. And if it's true, then I'm going to be a genius. And if it's false, then I'll just be like everybody else and like, who got it wrong. So
Yeah. No, yeah,
yeah.
nothing electorally would surprise me. So I think it's kind
Yeah.
of whatever to make a
Same.
prediction. But thinking back to 2016, we were talking about how there wasn't really a market correction with how the media talked about these things, where it was obvious that they ignored certain voters, ignored certain people's concerns, and lived in their own little bubble versus how a lot of people live their real life. Can you predict any takeaways a year from now, regardless of the outcome of the election, a year from now, 5 years from now, whatever it is? We'll look back at 2020, the election, and just the year in general, and say, oh, this is when this flipped. This is when we started to shift this way. Or whether it's how we talk about politics or how we talk about policy or how we consume media and then have conversations based off that.
Yeah. I don't know if there's going to be a moment for that will be the same for every group of voters, but I'll tell you this. I've noticed there was a moment that was pretty um, seminal to me, influential to me, and as being part of the Black community. And it came recently in the last couple of months during an interview with Joe Biden by Charlemagne the God, who's a radio personality. And Joe Biden now famously made the comment, if you don't vote for Trump, you ain't Black. Now, that wasn't a surprising comment to me. I don't think that many people were shocked by it. We acted shocked because there's a lot of clicks and acting shocked, but no one was really shocked. But what shocked me actually was Charlemagne's response. That's when I said there's a turning point happening here, because 2 years earlier or 4 years earlier, he would have just been like, "Amen, right on, I got you." But I am seeing, here's what I'm seeing in the Black community: a lot of Black voters not feeling necessarily that excited about Trump or Republicans, but saying, you know what? We had the first Black president for 8 years, and also Democrats have been promising this, us, this, that, and the other, and they come and they court our votes like Joe Biden every 4 years, and we're wondering, like, what's changed? Because Charlemagne's response to Biden there wasn't "Amen," or it wasn't "Hang on." It was no, this isn't about Donald Trump. This is a conversation about what you can get done for the Black community. I realized at that moment, because I'm seeing it in my friends and family, and again, they're not going to Trump. They're not like flipping for Trump, but what they're starting to ask questions. They're starting to say, well, why do you come around every 4 years and say this, and then you just leave us? You keep coming back and saying the problems are the same, times are worse than ever, but nothing's changed, and yet we keep voting for you, and nothing's changed. And then President Trump has the nerve to put out this platinum plan, where it's actually got plans in it, and he does criminal justice reform, and it's like, you may think that all that's fake or pandering, like that might be your opinion, and maybe you're right, I don't know, but the fact is that there's nothing happening on the other side, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Black voters are seeing that, and they're starting to, I'm not saying like 90% of Black voters are going to flip all of a sudden Republican. We're going to be largely Democrat voters, at least for a while, but I do see that landscape is shifting. Again, not necessarily thanks to Republicans, but because a lot of Black voters are seeing Democrats just aren't coming through. A lot should have changed with our first Black president, and it really didn't. And you see guys like 50 Cent and Ice Cube and Kanye coming out and saying, well, Kanye's super MAGA, but the other two, the other two aren't. But just saying, I'm not pro Trump. I'm just pro, like, whoever wants to work with Black folks, like
Right.
whoever wants to work with us to get stuff done. It's time to stop complaining and start getting serious about getting stuff done. So that is a shift I see among Black voters, and Black voters have always, and the Black community in the United States, period, in any facet of the culture, has actually always been the canary in the coal mine for everything. And so I think it would behoove us to watch a little bit about in what's happening in the Black community this election cycle, how the votes turn out, and what that might mean for the American electorate at large.
Stephen A. Smith at ESPN, who I think is generally a pretty liberal guy, but a few years ago he spoke at some forum, and I think he might have gotten a little bit of hot water about it, but he said something to the effect of, because Democrats can bank on the Black vote and Republicans don't think they can ever have the Black vote, the Black community, their issues can be ignored. And he wishes that for one election cycle, every Black voter would vote Republican, just to show that your vote can't be taken for granted. And I've kind of wondered, I mean, this is the best example, I think, because of the examples that you outlined too, about like Ice Cube and everything. But I wonder if more demographics will eventually just get tired every election cycle of being talked about, like Joe Biden's going to be in Florida to court the Hispanic vote. Well, the Hispanic vote is different if it's in Florida, if it's in Texas, in Arizona. They have different concerns. It's more diverse than that. Or
Mm-hmm.
courting white suburban women voters. Like, the more complex our minds get, and the more there's more diversity of thought, if there will be just more, the way we talk about this kind of stuff changes, and when we can't take segments of voters for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I'll give Donald Trump credit for this. At least he's got like a team of Black advisors around him, and he's like actually making overtures. One of the things that, even though I wasn't a Trump voter in 2016, one of the things that I always thought was interesting at the time was how he went to the NAACP. I mean, as a GOP candidate, and said,
Yeah.
hey, what do you have to lose? And as silly as that sounds, it was like no Republican had done that. Republicans ask me all the time, Kira, why do Black people vote largely Democrat? Well, I always say government goes to those who show up. Well, guess who's showing up in the communities? It's Democrats. Now, they're not delivering, but they're showing up. There's a face to put to the policy.
Mm-hmm.
And the Republicans have given up that space. So that's Stephen A. Smith that's a very intelligent point that he made. And so the demographics as they change, are people going to start taking our votes for granted? I don't think the current set of politicians that we have, I think they're so ensconced in politics as usual. I don't think they get it yet. And that'll be the lasting legacy of the Trump presidency, whether or not he loses next week. It will be the real legacy. I mean, he'll have a few, and that's a totally different podcast, I guess. But the real legacy, I think, will be that this outsider from the world of entertainment who had no business being in the White House, who had no business running for politics, showed us all how much politics matters to us and how much power we've given it without asking for anything in return. And I think that is going to be a lasting legacy. The GOP is going to have to catch up with the idea that the electorate, the mind of the electorate has changed. And we do have all these other avenues of input coming at us all day long. And so instead of depending on your base to push you through whatever election, depending on them to get mad enough, maybe you need to go after people. Maybe you need to start addressing individual needs, like you say, in individual places. What the Hispanics want in Florida is totally different than what they want here in Southern California. You know, maybe you, by the way, here's another great argument for our electoral college, you know?
Yes.
Like,
Totally.
which comes up every election cycle, which is so dumb. But yeah, I think Trump's legacy will be sort of shaking us out of our malaise, our political malaise at the very least. Love him or hate him, I do think that both parties are going to deal with their electorates a bit differently moving forward. And I hope in a good way.
Me too. I think that's a great prediction without making a prediction about what actually might happen policy-wise. So I think the cultural impact is way more interesting than we know what Joe Biden will do as president. We know what Donald Trump might want to accomplish in a second term. I think the cultural impact is way more interesting. And I want to talk real quick about your podcast. And I wanted to ask you about the name, Just Listen to Yourself. But I think we got part of how you ended up with that just based off your insight about political rhetoric and discourse. But how did you come up with the name and the branding and how you approach the podcast of Just Listen to Yourself?
Sometimes I see people arguing on social media and making talking points. And there's a lot of talking points floating around out there, right? And that's what Twitter is. It's 280 characters. It's a microblog for talking points. But sometimes I'll read people's talking points and I'll think, are you even listening to yourself? Do you even know what you just said here? I'll give an example. Like one time somebody said that the reason that the abortion rate is so high in the Black community is that's justice, because, not to get into an abortion discussion, don't panic, but it's justice because there's a lot of Black kids who are born into a situation where they're going to face poverty and a lot of struggle and racism, and this is a very difficult life. And so to deny the Black community access to abortion services is to give America all of these Black kids with challenges. And I'm like, but did you even hear what you just said? You just said we need fewer Black people in America. Like, did you
right.
hear that? You know, I don't think people listen to I know that's not what that person meant. I know it's not what they meant. What they meant was, hey, you know, mothers might need this option if they don't feel like they can provide for a baby or whatever their pro-choice argument was. That is not what they said. And sometimes I think we don't listen to ourselves. We spout these talking points, but we never draw them out to their logical conclusion. We never listen to what we're actually saying. We just think we're scoring points. So sometimes I'll just be like, just listen to yourself. And I want people to really take the time to listen to some of the things you're saying. Listen to your talking points and draw them out to their logical conclusion. Because sometimes when you do that, you're not really saying that. You're not really saying what you think you are. That person was not really saying that they want fewer Black people in the world. That's not what they meant, but that's what they were saying. And think about it. So then you got to reframe your argument. Then you got to reform your argument. That is called critical thinking. And that is the thing that we're missing right now in our political discourse. And it's what, in my opinion, it is the absolute base of why everything's so tense right now. We've forgotten how to think. And when you don't think, you don't feel confident in your political views. And when you don't feel confident in your political views, that's when emotion comes in. And that's when, so if we all feel better about what we believe, if we all feel more confident in what we're believing, we've parsed it out, we've taken the time to think about it, then those political discussions become less combative, because now we're not trying to convince the other person. We're just having an interesting political debate. We're just having an interesting political conversation. But that comes when you understand what you believe more. So on Just Listen to Yourself, I challenge people to parse through their arguments. I set up arguments and I answer those arguments. I give my opinions. I engage in some persuasion. But mostly I invite people to really find some middle ground. How can you look at this issue from the other side? And how will that affect what you think about this issue as well? So that's available wherever you can find your podcasts.
That's great. Critical thinking's missing, I think, because it's hard. It's a difficult thing for people to. It's not that hard, but they think it's hard. And then also, it's hard for people to admit that they're wrong, or that they are willing to change their mind of something. So that whole process becomes kind of scary because they don't want to admit they're wrong, or admit that they're going to change their mind, or go through that mental exercise of following an argument to its logical conclusion. I think it might be daunting when reality is we all should be doing it. We should always be auditing our minds every so often to make sure that we actually believe what we're saying and that it makes sense to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will. You'll release some of that tension when you do have a better idea of what you believe. And I also think that sometimes when we challenge ourselves to really think about what we believe, it's not just about forming a better argument, but it is also about making space for other arguments. Other people sharpen you. Other people sharpen your point of view. You need to be able to talk to people about this kind of stuff, people who think differently than you. So it opens you up to the idea of having better and more productive political conversations, because you want to hear how other people think about things, because that will sharpen your ideas. It might not change you at all. You might not need to be changed, but it'll give you a better ability to express yourself. When we are able to be clear instead of judging each other from the start, it's easier to argue in good faith. And we need to get back to arguing in good faith, not automatically assigning perverse motives to the person we're talking to before we even start the conversation. But it can't start with anyone else. You can't force that on anyone else. It has
Absolutely.
to be you. It's your work. You have to do the work.
Absolutely. That's great. So the podcast is available anywhere. Is there anywhere else you want to let people know where they can find you or your work?
You can find me on Twitter at Real Kira Davis, and I'm editor-at-large for redstate.com. You can go over there and find me writing about lots of stuff. And then I have a community page over at locals.com. It's called Davis Nation, and that's just for people who just, for whatever reason, can't get enough of the sound of my voice and want more content. Join me over there, Davis Nation on locals.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great.